오후에 두 번째 세션 시작하겠습니다. 혼자서 소개하라고 했더니 앞으로 소개해달라고 해서 단테라는 아시아 지역의 기술부사장입니다. 초창기 때부터 플렉서스에 참여를 했기 때문에 꽤 플렉서스에 대해서는 오랜 역사와 조예를 좀 갖고 있는 사람이고요. 그래서 앞으로 제품에 대한 소개라든가 기술적인 서포트라든가 거의 담당하고 있는 사람입니다. 단테 부사장을 소개하겠습니다.
Thank you very much, Henry, for the introduction. I hope you say nice things about me. I didn't listen much, but I tried to take to the next stage in this presentation. So on the first part of our presentation, Andre touched upon some of the basic points around PLEXOS, about modeling, and also some key concepts that we are going to look deeper into as we go along in the presentation. So the title of my presentation is PLEXOS, or Integrated System Planning. Whenever we talk about integrated system planning, we are usually looking longer ahead into the future. And it's an important exercise. We know the power system is always evolving. There's always some changes, and so more often than not, you have a lot of changes happening this week, this month, this year. And you can expect that as you move further ahead into time, these changes are going to have a compounding effect. So renewable targets you set this year are going to affect how you operate or even how you plan your system into the future. So when you come and talk about integrated system planning, it's important to understand that the results of these studies, it's never going to be a single result or even a set of results. What you need to do is you need to look at the different scenarios, try to create a good enough set of scenarios that might represent the potential future policies that the system could be integrating as you move along. And then you need to have a way to model them and understand how would that change, how I operate my existing power plants and my future power plants. And an important part of integrated system planning that I will be touching upon in the later part of the presentation is about integration of different commodities when you look at system planning. So electricity is something that everyone is very familiar with, but there's also the need to plan not just for the electricity system, but also with the gas system, the water system, the combined heat and power system, the LNG receiving terminals. So decisions like that can have a very big impact on how the system is operating and whether the system becomes more expensive or less expensive to run as you move ahead into the future. So for the agenda, the first point I will talk about is give a brief overview of integrated system planning and what does that mean from the modeling perspective. The second point I will look into is how do you model increased penetration of renewable energy and also transmission upgrades into the system. We then, for the third point, we will look into some of the use cases where PLEXOS is being used by AEMO's, the Australian energy market operator, to actually create base models and publish these base models for everyone in the country and even outside of the country to test, model, and simulate the potential future state of the system. And I'll be touching upon a few of the models they publish and how they are constructed, what is the process they go through when they publish these reports, and what type of models they are actually including in these planning models. And the last point, as I mentioned before, is I'm going to touch very briefly onto one very important topic, that is integration of electricity, gas, LNG, and even hydrogen models together into one single modeling tool, and try to understand what are the relationship and how these different elements could integrate together to create a cleaner and also a more sustainable and hopefully a cheaper system to operate in the future. So before we jump into the specifics, I just wanted to share with you some of the power plants that were developed and built using PLEXOS. So you can see, and this is just focusing on the Asian region. So you can see that pretty much every country in Southeast Asia and even further into the extended Asia region are using PLEXOS in one way or another to create these planning scenarios and understand how, for example, the wholesale electricity market will look like into the future when it comes to Singapore. How to plan for renewable penetration in Malaysia, and what is the penetration target they would like to have when it comes to solar energy for Malaysia. So we have Philippines studies of renewable integration. We have India with a very extensive set of studies that they utilize PLEXOS for. And we also have China, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and even Korea. And all these are public reports and reports that you can actually access by looking for them online. This is just a glimpse of what can be done with PLEXOS, and there is even more things that you can do. And we hope that in the future, PLEXOS is used more and more by the Korean players just to carry out similar studies for the Korean system. So, what is the challenge with integrated system planning? I mean, the system is very well understood by everyone, but what often happens is that you have different stakeholders, and although the different stakeholders are looking for the same final objective, which is minimizing the cost of provision of electricity while increasing the reliability of and the security of supply for every consumer, they are very different type of objectives. They have different scenarios they would like to look into, and they have different considerations when it comes to how they want the future system to look like. So on the first row on the top, you see that you would like to understand what is the generation and the capacity inputs and what type of fuels do you need for the future. So you will like to understand what is the load forecast or the system demand, and then try to understand what are the possibilities and create scenarios around resource investment plan for the future. When you look at the infrastructure and the transmission, and this transmission investment plan doesn't need to be only about electricity, but in this particular case we are looking at the transmission system for the electricity only. So you probably would like to have some sort of load forecast. In this case, we are looking at nodal load forecast. This might be needed or it might not be needed depending on where the future system will actually develop into. So if you will need to have an understanding of what are the existing and planned transmission projects and what are the potential upgrades that you can have in this system. You will then have the transmission system operator providing guidelines and policies that they would like to implement going forward. And of course, create some scenarios around this potential future system development that you would like to understand. And that will give you an output of the transmission investment plan. Similarly, I will not go through every single box here, but you can see that there's also distribution players as part of this investment plan and system planning. And we also have gas development. All of these are very complex in general. They have multiple jurisdictions when it comes to regulatory or policies, and they are, although they are very linked to each other, they are generally done independently or with some sort of separation. So you have multiple cadences. So investment plan for transmission and perhaps the distribution investment plan might not be aligned one to another. One might be done on a yearly basis, one might be done on a monthly basis and based on seasons, etc. And there's actually a lot of scenarios. So one thing that we see here is that everyone wants to have some certain set of scenarios. So how do we operate and how do we actually carry out such a complex planning exercise? So it's important in order to obtain an optimal investment plan that you carry out all this analysis in as few steps as possible. So the optimal investment plan for cleaner, reliable, and cost-effective system needs to take into consideration every single element that we have discussed before. So that will create you need to correlate the different forecasts. You need to include extreme weather events, for example, to understand the reliability of the system, whether you can actually keep the lights on if then some extreme scenarios happen, and there needs to be a very deep understanding of the correlation between all these different scenarios. So how do we do that? The best and most optimal way to do it is by including everything into one single tool and one single exercise, and providing flexibility for everyone involved in the process to have a scenario or set of scenarios that you would like to understand, and then you can come up with a matrix of the future states that the system might go into as you move along in time. So, what does this process look like when you evaluate that in PLEXOS? So, let's take an example where you would like to understand what is the renewable penetration impact into the system. And we see the famous duck curve, and right now it's looking less and less like a duck. It's looking like some other sort of animal, maybe even a giraffe, if you look very deep into that. So people were very worried about the duck curve. Now they are even more worried once they see that the actual system load, the effective load for the system will become much deeper in terms of renewable penetration. So you need to understand, first of all, what are the possibilities, and you would like to plan what is the optimal, what are the pathways for you to carry out an increased penetration of renewables. And the next step, once you actually understand and plan the model, is to design and simulate different possibilities when it comes to system development. So you might have a question whether you probably could install a battery that is with lower power capacity but with higher energy capacity. And compare that to something that perhaps costs the same but can provide you with more power but less total energy capacity. So another very important one that we might actually consider is like, do you need more CCGTs in the system, or do you need more OCGTs in the system, and how will that impact the system? And an important part here is that in this case we are considering an OCGT with transmission line expansion. So it's not just about how you expand and change your energy or your generation base, but also what other infrastructure developments you need in order to make them work and to make your system operate effectively. So, and then the next step is actually to optimize this and implement the system in a model. And when we talk about system planning, this is usually a circle that requires multiple iterations. And it doesn't stop in one go. You might see the results and create new scenarios and then understand again what is the plan, design and simulate other possibilities and re-optimize the system again. So having the possibility to do this in a systematic and efficient way is actually very important for both planners but also for energy players in the market.
네, 지금 한국에서의 그 기본 계획이라든가 송전 개발 계획이라든가 여러 가지 것들이 다른 나라에서도 똑같이 별개의 그 계획으로서 계속 진행되어 왔었는데 최근 들어서 신재생이 많이 증가하면서 그 인터미턴시에 대한 문제 때문에 그것을 통합해서 계획하는 게 필요하다라는 것에 대한 요구사항이 많이 증가했습니다. 그래서 오늘 보여줄 사례가 다들 그렇게 필요성은 얘기했지만 각 나라에서 어떻게 하는가 등의 주로 호주의 모델을 가지고 아마 보여줄 것 같고요. 좀 특이점은 발전 계획, 송전 계획, 맨 밑에 가스 계획이 있는데 제 희망사항은 한국에서도 가스와 전력의 한꺼번에 하나의 그 규제기관과 커미션에서 다루어졌으면 하는 희망사항이 있고 또 한 가지 특이한 점은 배전 계획입니다. 그래서 지금 내일 발표할 그 자료에 보면은 호주의 네트워크 코스트가 전체 전기 비용의 한 40% 차용해요. 그래서 그 이유가 뭐냐고 물어봤더니 주로 배전 때문에 그렇다고 합니다. 그래서 특히 신재생이라든가 배터리가 늘어나고 그다음에 V2G 늘어나고 그래서 배전 쪽에서의 그 증가과 거기에 대한 코스트가 늘어나기 때문에 그런 것까지 통합해서 계획하는 것이 필요할 것으로 보여서 아마 또 준비한 것 같습니다.
Thank you for that. The next step I would like to discuss about is about modeling increased penetration of renewable energy and also how do we couple that together with transmission upgrades and what is needed from the modeling perspective in order to achieve this, not just to be able to do it, but to be able to do it in an efficient manner and also in an accurate manner. So I have highlighted a few topics that I believe are very important when it comes to the Korean context, and these are my views. I mean, there might be others. The order of these points might not be as accurate as it is in real time, but these different elements we have seen that are very important, not just in Korea, but across different markets that we have been discussing and we've been looking into in the past. So what we want to touch upon is how do you actually model renewable energy? So a key and very important part of modeling renewable is how do you actually cater for uncertainty and how you include that in your modeling tools. And the second one that is very important is about controlling simulation detail. So you can be very when you look at optimization problem, the more detail you have, the longer it will take to solve, or the bigger the requirements are for the computational complexity of the problem. So you either need a bigger machine or you need to wait for a longer time to actually get the results. So controlling simulation detail can make a very big difference in how you model renewable energy. Low duration curves are very good when you're looking at balancing the energy, but when it comes to intertemporal constraints, it might not be the best option, especially when you're looking at a system with high penetration of renewables. Some things that we would like to actually touch upon too are different emerging technologies. How do you model batteries, and what is the role of batteries in the future system? It might be supporting energy arbitrage or moving energy blocks from one point in the day to another point, but there's also a possibility to actually use batteries for other things like ancillary services, and we have been discussing this last night. There's even some pilot studies where they are looking at batteries to support black start of the system. It's a trial, and there's still research going on this topic, but these emerging technologies can serve multiple purposes. And of course, hydrogen. And hydrogen is, everyone is talking about hydrogen, everyone is interested in hydrogen, and everyone has a lot of ideas about hydrogen. But how does it integrate into the future system? Hydrogen coming from nuclear might be very different from hydrogen coming from renewables. So you might need to transport that hydrogen from the generation side to the load centers. And in the context of Korea, if you have a lot of nuclear in the east, for example, the bottleneck might be transmission line now. But if you convert that into hydrogen, you still need to transport it. So is it better to increase the transmission capacity or to invest in hydrogen generation and also transportation? Another point that is also very important about our future market operation is actually supply adequacy, and Andre has touched quite a lot on this point. I don't plan to dwell too much into that, but we see that reliability, I mean, it's not just about minimal cost, it's also about reliable operation of the system. And the last one is about transmission modeling, and how, and a very important point I want to touch upon is how do you model system constraints without data. This doesn't mean that you will not have any sort of data, but you can create potentially a constraint that mimics the operation of the system without the need for full transmission data, which is normally classified as confidential and very high security type of data for any country that we have in the world. So when it comes to modeling uncertainty, PLEXOS has 3 different approaches to cope with uncertainty. On one side, we have deterministic scenarios. So you can take one sample and then create a model that will give you an optimal solution for each one of these scenarios. And then you can compare these different scenarios and understand what is the impact of the different policies or the different input sensitivities when it comes to the results. PLEXOS is also possible. In PLEXOS, it's also possible to create Monte Carlo simulation. It's very easy to go from one sample for solar input, for example, to many different samples, and you can create 10, 100, or even 1,000 different profiles, and understand how the system will behave and what is the system output once you consider these different changes. This is a very useful tool for statistical analysis when it comes to decision support. And one example that I will usually use when it comes to Monte Carlo is that you can create many sensitivities around any input parameters in PLEXOS. And what you can see is how much the total system cost will change. So, and then understand what are the policy scenarios or what are the situations or the extreme events that will lead to either failure to supply electricity or have unserved energy in the system, or actually have a lower cost of electricity for part of the simulation. The last but not the least method that PLEXOS has to cope with uncertainty is about stochastic optimization. And this becomes very important as you move into the future, and especially for players who might not have a full picture of the system. System operator, they have all the data, they know the system, they can operate the system in a very efficient way. But how do you beat your capacities into the future when you don't know whether the solar or the wind profiles are going to be high, medium, or low for the next day? And having these different inputs and coming up with an optimized outcome that takes into consideration all these different possibilities is a very powerful way to model in the future. This is not very common in most tools, and you can have deterministic scenario, you can have Monte Carlo simulations in many other tools, but stochastic optimization and doing stochastic optimization in an efficient way is something that is very easy to do and very important part of the PLEXOS capabilities. When we talk about the expansion studies or long-term capacity expansion, one very important point when you are actually increasing the penetration of renewables is actually how you control the simulation detail. So there are different approaches. I will be touching upon 3 of them in this case, and all 3 of them are available in PLEXOS. So you can either use a low duration curve approach, and as I mentioned before, it's very good to understand the capacities and the balance supply and demand side of the system. But the drawback for this method is that it does not allow to identify how the flexible resources be required to dispatch under this intermittency. So you don't care about the chronology. You are only putting focus on the capacities and the quantities. The second method that is also available in PLEXOS is actually a fitted load curve approach. In this case, it's similar to the low duration curve, but what you do is you keep the chronology in between each block. So you group together 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the night. You can group together a couple of hours in the middle of the day and also during the peak times, and keep the chronology in between these periods. So this is much better than the low duration curve approach, but it still gives you, because you are grouping together multiple periods into one single block, you are losing the intertemporal constraints or intertemporal considerations in the system. And because you are looking at many years into the future, this usually requires you to plot multiple hours within one day, and that might lead to situations where you have very rapidly changing renewable generation, and you are planning the system, but you are not planning for all the possible outcomes. You are only looking at the balance. The third approach that is something that is very unique to PLEXOS is the chronological approach. In this case, what we use in order to calculate the expansion study is actually the real sample of the daily dispatch of the system. So you can sample either a couple of days every month, or you can sample 1 week every quarter, or perhaps 3 days for every month for the next 12 months, and include full chronology when it comes to solar intermittency. And because you can go down to very, very small time step, you can simulate and mimic the dispatch of the system at the half-hour level, 15-minute level, 5-minute level, and even lower. So this is an approach that is being considered more and more, because as you move into 20, 30, 40, and perhaps even 50% of penetration with renewables, then the constraints that will define how you expand your system might not be the capacity, it might not be the cost of the fuel, it might not be the minimum stable level, but it might be the ramping that you need to face in between two different periods or two different blocks of 5 minutes. Okay. When it comes to reliability modeling in PLEXOS, so Andre has shown one of the methods, which is the PASA method. In PASA, what PLEXOS do is actually try to understand whether there's enough capacity in the system, but it's losing some of the detail in the constraints and also any intertemporal constraints that we have mentioned before about the renewables, for example. So for the PASA method and for the traditional probabilistic reliability modeling, what you do is you create probabilities for the events, and then you derate or you look at only the capacities of the system. PLEXOS can go one step further. So what we normally see some of the customers doing is they actually take the Monte Carlo simulation. So instead of using probability and the force outage rate and other properties that you use normally to calculate the reliability metrics, LOLP and others, you can actually simulate the system dispatch and can consider all the system constraints. So different demand scenarios, you can do different renewal forecasts, you can model different hydro availability, you can model different outage patterns, etc., etc. And although it might take multiple patterns and samples or iterations to converge, it is a much comprehensive evaluation and much closer representation of the actual system. And this is something that AEMO is leveraging quite a lot with this ST-PASA method. So although the name it still refers to PASA, what they are doing is they're actually using Monte Carlo simulation to try to understand how the system adequacy looks like, considering all the transmission constraints, demand scenarios, and also renewable forecasts. So you take 200, 300, and in some cases thousands of samples and combine them together and understand what is the probability of having an event where you have unserved energy under these different combinations, and whether there's any risk to the system. That's the main most important outcome. Yeah, and another point that is and Andre has touched upon this briefly before, is how much transmission detail is required in order to capture the behavior of the system, and what are the different possibilities that you have in order to still be accurate, but try to simplify the system to a point where you can actually solve it and you can have many multiple scenarios solved at the same time. So on the first figure here, we can see a full topology system for Korea, and this is taken from it's not a real system representation, it's just a diagram, and we can see that there's a lot of nodes, and this might be what you look at when you are considering a full dollar system. But when it comes to modeling transmission detail, this level of detail is ideal, but it's very, very hard to achieve. It's not impossible, but it takes a lot of data, and it also takes a lot of computational power in order for you to replicate the actual behavior of the system at the nodal level. This is something that is very, very easy to set up, but then you need a lot of data and you need a lot of computational power in order to solve this type of problems. But what are the alternatives to this type of simulation? You could actually look at regional topology, and this is actually what Australian operators are doing. So they don't take into consideration, especially for the market operation, they don't take into consideration every single line in the system. They don't look at voltage, they don't look at all the flows at every single line, but they represent the system on an aggregated level, but still keep the geographical sparsity of the system. So you have your northeast region, you might have a Busan type of region, you might have a southwest region, of course Jeju, like connected through the HVDC cables, and then you might create transmission capacities or equivalent transmission capacity between these regions. So what does this provide you? It provides you the ability to control and to understand the impact of your dispatch and whether you have enough capacity to transfer power from one region to another, but it can also serve you to understand different level of detail, so understand whether there's any risk on those regions, whether there's any potential for unserved energy, etc. So this is totally possible in PLEXOS. So you can either do a full nodal system. You can also have a regional topology, and you can, if you want to go in between these two levels, you can also have a sub-regional topology and look into more details for parts of the system where you have a specific interest in, or parts of the system that might be very tricky to operate because of some internal constraints or congestion that you have in there. So all of these different transmission details are possible within PLEXOS, and if you have data, you can model the full topology. If you don't have the full topology data, you can actually come up with a regional equivalent model. Accuracy might not be the same as the nodal system, but you can create equivalent constraints that represent the behavior of the system without too much compromise on the accuracy of the results.
잠깐 앞에서 얘기했던 ISP, 그러니까 Integrated System Planning을 다 들어가기 전에 각각의 플렉소스 파워 모듈이건 가스 모듈이건 그 안에서 좀 특이한 모델링 기법에 대해서 우선 소개를 했어요. 특히 그 요새 중요하게 되는 게 신재생의 증가에 따라서 인터미터시, 그다음에 리저브를 얼마나 가져가야 되는가, 이러한 문제에 대한 그 시뮬레이션을 하기 위해서는 언서튼티에 대한 모델링이 꽤 중요하고요. 그래서 아직까지 한국에서는 많이 적용을 안 해봤는데 이 친구들이 꽤 강력하게 추천하는 게 몬테카를로 시뮬레이션하고 시나리오 베이스는 지금 하고 있지만 몬테카를로하고 그 스토캐스틱 모델링에 대해서 꽤 강조를 하고 있습니다. 그래서 이게 앞으로 한국에서 좀 모델링한테 좀 쓰였으면 좋겠다는 거고, 특히 리뉴어블의 그 발전량 패턴에 대해서 과거 히스토리컬 데이터를 가지고 플렉소스 프로 네가 샘플링 해라. 그래서 샘플링해서 몇 번이 그 이터레이션을 해서 그럴듯한 표준 분포를 가져가고 그거에 대해서 하나의 결과치를 내는 게 크로노로지컬이고 여러 가지 분포를 그려주는 게 몬테카를로거든요. 그러한 기법을 통해서 신재생의 불확실성에 대해서 어느 정도 커버링이 가능하다는 얘기가 있고, 또 한 가지는 로드 듀레이션 커버하고, 그다음에 크로노로지컬 모델하고, 그다음에 피티드라는 게 아주 맨 마지막에 나온 기법이 결국은 자기네들밖에 없다는데 다른 애들도 있다고 그래요. 근데 그게 뭐냐면은 주로 그 티피컬 데이, 티피컬 윅, 티피컬 먼스를 뽑아내서 인터미터시에 대해서 어떠한 임팩트가 올지, 그것은 시스템 운영자뿐만이 아니라 발전사업자 입장에서도 특히 리얼타임 마켓이나 프라이스 비디로 봤을 때 임팩트가 크거든요. 그런 부분들에 대해서 어떤 불확실성에 대해서 모델링할 수 있는 기법이 안에 내재되어 있다는 얘기를 드리고, 마지막에 트랜스미션 라인에 대해서는 노달까지도 가능한데 이건 굉장히 힘들고 조날로 만들 수도 있고 썸 조날로도 갈 수가 있는데 썸 조날로 가는 거에 대한 필요성 같은 경우는 예를 들어서 우산 지역에 원자력의 증발에 따라서 혹은 간발에 따라서 파워플로우가 달라지면 내 발전소에 대해서 어떤 영향을 미치는 것이냐는 좀 더 세부하게 다른 쪽은 그냥 존으로 놔두고 내 존에 대해서는 좀 썸으로 들어가고 싶다는 때는 그런 것들을 만들 수가 있고 안전 입장에서는 요새 커테일먼트가 많이 일어나고 있는데 호남이나 제주 지역에 대해서는 좀 더 썸 존화를 해서 배전망까지의 구성을 좀 가능하게 하고 싶다 그러면은 그 지역만 특이하게 또 서브 존으로 해서 만들 수 있는 기법이 있다라는 정도가 소개된 거고 그나마 그 호주의 사례를 통해서 ISP 얘기를 할 것 같습니다.
Thank you for the translation. So when it comes to different solutions and maybe looking at a bit deeper into what Australia, the market operator in Australia is doing when it comes to these different topologies, they actually provide transmission constraints in a public manner to every participant in the market, and it's also open for anyone outside of Australia too. So what they do is instead of providing network data or topology data, which is very critical infrastructure and very sensitive type of information, what they do is they actually publish this sets of constraints that they utilize for the system operation. And what this gives to the players and to the GenCos and to everyone who is actually part of the system is it gives them a closer representation of the actual system dispatch. So bridging the gap between the market system and the operational system of the country. So examples of what they might publish, I mean these are just hypothetical examples, is you can define, let's not look at the nodal system for example. Let's focus on the regional topology instead. So you might have some constraints that says that because, let's look at Jeju Island as an example first. So because Jeju Island is connected only through this link to the rest of the system, there might be some ancillary service requirements inside of the island. So you might need to have some ancillary services provided locally inside of the system. You might have some inertia constraints that you want to keep. You want to keep enough synchronous reserve in the system. So you might define a constraint that says at any point in time, I need to have at least 2 coal power plants running in Jeju or any other type of rotary or synchronous machine. And that is a constraint that can be published online. The system operator is not telling you which one is going to be dispatched, but it's giving you information that will make your planning and your simulation of the system much similar to the actual operation. Similar constraints can be applied, for example, to model the congestion that you might or might not have in between regions. So say that the total generation on this area should be minus the flow going in this way, plus the flow going in this way should be less or equal to 1,000 megawatts. So this constraint will give you an idea of how to model this transmission link between the regions that you see here. So you understand that normally the flow of power in this link will be actually going upwards, and then you create an equivalent constraint that will mimic the actual dispatch that the operator will follow. So because these rules are very easy to understand if you know the rule, but it's very hard to actually model unless you know what the rules are. So that's where AEMO is actually doing something, and this is applied not just for the AEMO on the NEM, but it also applied in the web. So they are now publishing the constraints online, and you can include those constraints in your modeling as you move into the The next points I would like to cover are focusing more on how PLEXOS is being used by AEMO. So PLEXOS is a very powerful market simulation, but it also includes transmission modeling capabilities. So what they have, and all of this is public information, and I'll be sharing some of the links for the references later. They have a capacity outlook model, and this capacity outlook model is split into two different types of models. On one side, you have very detailed long-term model, and this is a over 25-year horizon planning model that includes both the electricity and the gas infrastructure. Gas demand, electric demand, gas supply, and also electricity generation. So, because this is a very long model and it also includes multiple commodities, the complexity of such a model is actually much higher. So, what they have also as part of the modeling is actually a planning model that includes only the electricity and the transmission system. And this is different level of detail, so probably more detail on the transmission constraints, for example, but the gas inputs or the gas information is an input into the system. So the reason why they need two different models is because they want to control the level of detail and also the complexity of these models. And I will show you a workflow or how they actually interact with these two different models within the same exercise. They have another one which is called time sequential model, and this is actually used. This is more of a operational model where they have very detailed generation, dispatch, and reliability analysis capabilities. And of course, there's another one which is the gas supply model, which looks into the gas system, but in much more detail than this. This is looking at gas dispatch with gas transmission at daily granularity. All these models that you have seen, you have here, are built and executed in PLEXOS. So PLEXOS is able to include all of these and many more use cases, and this is what the AEMO is actually using when it comes to PLEXOS. Another very important part to the whole planning and forecasting exercise for AEMO is actually the power system analysis tool. And in this case, they have another model which is called the Network Development Outlook model. And what this is it is different tools can be used, but it's a PSSC AC power flow type of model where they actually test the planning and dispatch models against technical requirements for the power system, security, strength, inertia, and others. So these models are actually connected, and the dispatch scenarios that you obtain on this on the PLEXOS model can be transferred directly into other power system analysis tools, and you not only have a minimal cost and viable dispatch, you can also test for other security constraints or even system strength and inertia constraints that you might have on the model. So this is how AEMO is using PLEXOS for both planning and also forecasting. And there are more uses that we are not going to cover today, but this is kind of an overview of what they are doing with PLEXOS and other tools together. So a very important point for AEMO is something that it's very important for market players and for everyone in general. It's actually the publications they actually release on a regular basis. So what they do is they actually have regular updates and different cadence. Some of the models they are being updated every year, some of them they are updated every 2 years, and some of them are even the FT PASA, for example. I mean, the results are published on a more frequent basis. So what they provide is they provide very extensive documents where they outline the methodology they use for their planning exercises. So there is a link here, and there's a QR code that hopefully works, and it should take you to the list of AEMO publications. And those publications include the methodology, include some sample reports, and also update to those reports. And when it comes to the methodology, they publish the input assumptions, but they also publish their PLEXOS models they use for these reports. So you're not just getting the report and the results, you are also getting the model they use for these reports. And why this is important is because it allows the rest of the people in Australia and outside of Australia to look at the models, create additional sensitivities, and extend the modeling for whatever use you have in case. And this is how the different. These are just a few of the publications they have. So they have an ESOO model. I will be looking more detail into what is an ESOO model, the gas statement of opportunities, and also the ISP, which is I'm going to also look into detail later. So when you look at these different models, you see which models are being used. And then this is a very simplified workflow on how the results of these different models are actually being integrated and used together in order to carry out forecasting and planning exercises. So you have on one side the electricity demand, the other side is actually the gas demand forecast, and then you have the electricity statement of opportunities, which is the ESOO model, the integrated system plan, which is this is looking at next 10 years, this is looking at 25 and over years, and this is looking into more detail at the gas system for AEMO의. So let's just have a quick comparison of these two planning models that they publish in PLEXOS. So they have an ESOO model and ISP models. So the ISP model is a policy and investment analysis tool that they have different scenarios built into the model. They have, for example, scenario slow, medium, and high, and another one which is the step change update of distributed energy resources and variable energy resources scenarios. In the recent planning models, they also included hydrogen, and the step change is actually a scenario where they look into a very rapid and high increase in the usage of hydrogen into the system. This is a cost-based model, so although they have a bid-based model for the operations, they have come up with a cost-based model that is looking at a 20-year system outlook, and the model and the reports are updated every 2 years. So every 2 years, AEMO will publish a new report, and it will publish also the model, PLEXOS model that they are using for that report. The ESOO model is slightly different. It's focusing more on the reliability aspects of the system and creates a map of the asset and what are the opportunities for new assets in terms of investment, upgrades, and system reliability requirements for the next 10 years. It's a cost-based 10-year system, so still similar in the sense that it's a cost-based model, but it's looking at 10 years in the future, and the model and report is updated every year. So the ISP is updated every 2 years, but then the ESOO model, which is a reliability model, is updated every year. So all these reports, methodologies, and models are published and open to the public. It's something that is being really honest, it's not very common. There are a few countries in the world that publish these reports. Some of them in South America, Chile, for example, they publish the full model. There's other cases around the world, but it's something that helps in a very big way every player in the market to understand what is the potential state of the system and create a common language between everyone where they can take the same models, they can take the same inputs, and they can take the same assumptions and try to understand what is the potential impact of policy changes, for example, in the system as you move across in the time. So when it comes to the ISP, the ISP is establishing a whole system plan for the efficient development of the NEM, and they use a planning horizon of at least 20 years, as I said before, and they are looking into how will the NEM market transform from fossil fuel heavy to firm renewables and also net zero by 2050. So if you look at the model, it's not an entire system model. I mean, it's looking at the NEM part of the model, and although there are some regional connections and there are some transmission lines being built, it's not looking at the full nodal state of the system. And when we look at how they use these different models in the entire workflow, they have seen that they need a unified model platform. And the reason for this is because the only way you can actually transfer inputs, outputs, scenarios, models between different levels and different parts of the business or different stakeholders across Australia is by talking the same language. And the language they have chosen to talk is actually PLEXOS, so all these models are developed in PLEXOS, and the assumptions and the inputs are all compatible between each other. So PLEXOS is helping them develop these different models, and there's also a sequence in which these models are run. So you go from single-step models where you look at high-level detail, and then you take the outputs of this, and then you pass it down for a detailed long-term model, and then after that you do a time sequential model. And the time sequential model is a full detail daily dispatch of the system. So you are not only looking at the capacity expansion, what is the capacity, what are the capacities of the generation units in the future. You are also testing and making sure that the daily dispatch of the system is safe, reliable, and also understand what is the cost of operating such a system under different scenarios in the future. And the whole process here is actually a feedback loop. So the result from the detailed long-term model might go back again, and then you might run again a single-step long-term model, and so on and so forth. So all these documents or all these charts are available in the methodology documents that I've shared before, and it's these methodology documents are very detailed and to give you a very good understanding of how they are actually carrying out the whole planning process in Australia. Now we look back at the presentation, at the slide that I shared before, and we see that actually, if you look at the full system topology for the NEM, it's very, very detailed. But what AEMO is doing is actually creating different level of detail for the transmission system. So the ISP is actually working on a regional topology model. So you have each state is actually represented by a region, and you might have more than one link between the different regions. So you have 2 links connecting South Australia to Victoria. You have 1 link connecting Tasmania to Victoria, and then 2 links connecting Queensland to New South Wales. Very soon you have another link that will connect South Australia to New South Wales, and will change quite a lot how the system is operated. So although they are looking at regional topology for some of their models, some of the other models actually look at sub-regional topology. And in this case, you see that besides all the different connections and the different system details that they can have, they can actually look into more details at some parts of the system, and especially the parts that will face more changes as they move into the future, like the connection between South Australia and New South Wales, for example, and also the high renewable areas in the north and the Queensland region, and also on the east side of Australia. So PLEXOS is used for all these different levels of detail, and it's something that is very important when it comes to long-term planning and trying to control the complexity of the model without going into a position where you are actually limiting the number of scenarios that you can run because of the complexity of your optimization models. And this is, and I'm going to go through the entire diagram, but then this is how the different models are actually being used. What are the different scenarios that they consider? So we have the capacity of loop model, for example. We have the time sequential model, and what type of information is being shared between one of the models, and then also how the gas supply model, which is the gas side of the system, is integrated into this workflow. And as I mentioned before, the scenarios that are being considered for the ISP are a few scenarios. So and the scenarios are just shown here on the right. So you have a slow change scenario, you have a progressive change scenario, and you also have a step change, a big change, and then they have developed a hydrogen superpower scenario. This is a very flashy name, but it does capture the essence of the scenario. So they're trying to understand what high penetration of hydrogen system might look like into the future, if that's the direction that the policies makers will take the system into. And these here are some sample charts that are available in the report. So you can see that they not only give you a view of the system, they are very detailed when it comes to the results. So you see that the expected renewable generation capacity that will look as they move along into the future. You can see what they see as wind energy, utility scale solar, distributed PV, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of details and there's a lot of information, but more important than the information is actually the model they have. They publish the model they're using to get this chart. So if you are thinking of a potential fifth scenario that you want to test, you say, okay, maybe there is something else that will come into play. Maybe there will be more batteries. You can just take the same model they have and create a scenario, change the inputs, change the assumptions, and then come up with a fifth, sixth, seventh, and subsequent scenarios for this model, and try to replicate and see what is the difference in the system. So how would the coal retirement outcomes change? What is the type of firming capacity that you need as you move into high penetration of renewables, etc. So this is an example of the Australian market operator and how they are using different models in order to publish both the methodologies and the reports and the models for everyone in the country to look at.
넘어가셔야 될 것 같은데. 넘어가셔야. 정보 공개에 대해서만 잠깐 말씀하시죠.
Okay, let's look into the ESOO model. And as we said before, the ESOO model is slightly different. We have seen that it's more focusing on the reliability of the system, and you can see that it gives you an outlook of the reliability for the next 10-year periods. And some of and this includes a reliability forecast identifying any gaps on the reliability of the system for the next 5 years. So there's been an update to the 2023 assessment for the ESOO model, and then some of the outcomes of this report, this planning exercise for AEMO are published for everyone to see, and they are just shown here in the screen. So they have observed by looking at the model that there is a potential lack of capacity response to reliability gaps that are being forecasted in the system. So this is not an indication that it will happen, but it gives everyone in the system, both on the planning level, operational level, and also the policymakers, an outlook of what the system state might look like into the future. They see that there's going to be an increased consumption and demand forecast, so potentially increased higher increase in the demand forecast and a very strong pipeline of developments across variable resources, storage and demand side solutions and transmission that are required in order to comply with this system. And this is like just a snapshot of the executive summary of this ESOO report. So they say that there's not availability of generation and transmission. There's a lot of generation retirements, and there is just highlighting what are the potential challenges the system might face in the next 5 years. So when it comes to the workflow, it's actually very similar. So you use different market models, and there is a lot of analytics that are built into the system. So you can see that the inputs are shown in green, for example, and then you look at things like demand side participation. You look at different elements like outage rates for generators and how that might affect the market operation. You look at renewable forecast. You create a max bin forecast for the demand. You look at the connection forecast between different regions, and then include those demand traces and the renewable generation traces into the market modeling tool. And then you can, on one side, they use this to come up with the ISP, of course, but then for the ESOO reliability gap, they actually look and run multiple Monte Carlo simulations and understand what is the potential gaps, what are the potential gaps in the reliability of the system, and under which scenarios there might be unserved energy observed in the system. So this is just more information about the ESOO methodology, and these are the sample reports that they will include in the ESOO. So you can see that reliability gaps. You can see the expected unserved energy. It looks quite all right for the next 2 years, but then you do have very high spikes in different regions as you move across in time. This doesn't mean this will happen, but it's a warning sign that will require policymakers and different players in the market to act now, so they can actually bring these forecast numbers down and make sure that the system reliability is not compromised in the future. So, why is PLEXOS used by AEMO for these use cases, and what are the things that make PLEXOS a very good tool for this? On one side, we have flexibility in the horizon. So PLEXOS has options for single or multi-step solution. It has multiple chronological methods available, and this goes into the load ratio curve, the chronological, and the full sample mode. And it has flexible resolution for modeling renewables and batteries. So as you have more renewables and more batteries, it becomes a very important part of the entire modeling methodology. And having a flexible horizon is very important to carry out this type of studies. So it's a powerful engine that works across all different phases, so for planning, for operational, and even dispatch. It can be used for all of this. It can create customizable constraints for different policy scenarios. This is very flexible, and one of the reasons why PLEXOS is being used in over 70 countries. It has the ability to include your own constraints or any other future constraints that you might have, and it has very lifelike unique commitment properties. So a lot of details on the generator side, but then also a lot of flexibility in the way that you model this. And of course, it's scalability. So just to give you some numbers about this ISP model, it has 419 existing generators. It's looking at 360 potential build candidates, including renewables and conventional generation, and it allows any combination of generation and transmission expansion to happen. So such a model is a very complicated model, and PLEXOS is able to solve it, and it's able to model that in an efficient manner. And that's the reason why they're using PLEXOS for these different planning exercises. So with the next point I wanted to cover is about integration of electricity and also gas and LNG, and in this case I have a very clear distinction between the two. So gas, I mean more on the co-gas side for the Korean context, and LNG, which will be the receiving terminals. How do you operate this? How do you optimize them to work with the system? And of course, hydrogen modeling. And as we move ahead into the future, it's going to be a very important thing to consider and also to optimize. So usually it's very important to look at different energy systems. There are a lot of things that will impact, for example, how you operate your gas system. So if you operate your electricity system in a different way, you might have either increased demand of gas or you might have reduced demand of gas. So the electricity system will need to cater for different. You can optimize different elements in there. Of course, demand, generation, and also topology of the system. But then you have a very similar problem on the gas side. So if you increase your gas generation, you need to increase also the gas system capacity, and having a common tool to include the analysis of these two systems and solve it at the same time can create a lot of savings when you are looking especially at the planning side of it. And then one example is Australia. So and you can see they do have different levels of details when it comes to modeling, but an important part of the entire exercise is that they are actually combining both the gas and the electricity systems together. And combining them both together can give you a different perspective, and it can also make it much simpler for the planners and for the users in general to actually minimize and try to maximize the benefit for the interoperation of these systems. So on an operational level, they are operated together. So if when you are planning, you separate them into two different systems, you are losing this connection, and you might be losing the opportunity to save either by generating more or perhaps storing the gas to be used at a later stage when you don't have availability of renewables or other resources. And this is a very ambitious kind of slide, but I think it's something that is required for not just for Korea, but every other country in the world. Even more so when you have such an extensive and very integrated gas system in the country. So it's not just about your generation in the north and your generation in the south. It's how you operate your assets in the south. How do you plan for LNG receiving cargoes? How much flexibility do you have in your LNG receiving cargoes? What is the spot price? What is KOGAS offering? What is the type of contract you have with KOGAS? I mean, is this a take-or-pay contract, or is this a limited quantity or fixed price, or is it a 100% daily price? All these things can be modeled in PLEXOS, and PLEXOS can give everyone a good understanding of what the electricity and gas system can give you, and where are there any synergies or points where you can optimize to make the system less, minimize the cost of the system on one side, but at the same time also consider the reliability and the availability of these resources across time. So PLEXOS is able to model these two. It's not an easy task. There's a lot of data requirement needed for it to be done, but it is something that I hope and I think most countries will need to move into. Otherwise, they might be compromising either cost or reliability of the system by just assuming that these two systems can be operated independently and they will not affect each other when you're optimizing them. And the last slide I want to actually cover today is actually about optimization, and this includes another layer on top of the gas infrastructure, and that is actually the hydrogen and the ability to model, create hydrogen using different technologies, but also utilizing the existing infrastructure. So let's just look at jump back to the previous slide together to have an example of this. So we have seen before that there's actually two transmission lines connecting the east part of Korea to the central Seoul high demand nodes. So what if you can, instead of building a transmission line, you generate hydrogen on this region, and you utilize the gas network to transfer some of that energy across to the Seoul area. So I'm not saying it's gonna be cheaper, I'm not saying it's gonna be easy, but it's a possibility that needs to be explored. And as you look into 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years into the future, you need the ability to model these type of scenarios. Otherwise, you might be losing out in possibilities, and you might be making a suboptimal decision when it comes to developing the system and try to invest in different technologies that can help sustain the operation and also the reliability of the system. So this is a quick example that I wanted to include, and I appreciate everyone's time, and I'm happy to take some questions, if any, just about what I discussed before or any other topics that you would like to ask about. Thank you very much.
질문 있으시면 맨 마지막 부분 그 발전 사업자분들이 제일 관심이 있으실 수도 있는데 파워하고 가스하고 어떻게 옵티마이제이션 시킬 거냐. 파워 쪽에서는 가스 디맨드를 알려주고요. 가스 쪽에서는 그 디맨드를 가지고 내 플럭추에이션하는 발전량에 따라서 어떻게 가스 유니트를 가스 자산들을 어떻게 운영할 것인가. 배 빨리 오라고 건가, 배 늦게 오라고 건가, 탱크를 더 올릴 건가 말 건가, 이런 것들에 대해서 옵티마이제이션 하는 거라고 정도만 이해하시면 될 것 같고요. 전반적으로 질문이 있으시면
아니 정보 공개에 대해서
네.
ISP하고 ESOO 그다음에 미터 타사 요 부분에 정보 공개하는 부분을 전반적으로 한번 이야기를 해주시죠. 제가 이야기할까요?
네, 그러셔도 돼요.
네. 제가 특별히 여기에 좀 부탁을 드린 부분은 뭐 유익 있게 이렇게 들으신 분들은 상당히 이제 생각이 좀 많으실 텐데 우리도 2년 단위로 수급 계획을 이렇게 하고 있고 그래소와 산업부가 이제 수급 계획을 하고 있고 또 이제 한전이 송전 계획을 이렇게 하고 있는데 그게 여기서 이제 이야기하는 여기는 25 years ISP잖아요, 그죠? 그거는 동일하게 우리 전력 쪽하고 가스 쪽을 이렇게 이제 해가지고 하는데 우리가 뭐 수급 계획을 이렇게 항상 혼란스러운 부분들이 이제 여러 가지 상황들을 그래서도 만나고 한전도 만나고 전문가들도 그런 상황들을 이제 마주치고 또 심지어 민자발전들도 그런 상황인데 그걸 없애려고 하면 여기처럼 정보를 다 공개를 하고 그 정보 기반하에서 이러한 의사결정이 이루어진다라는 부분이 좀 제일 중요한 것 같아가지고 그리고 ESOO 같은 경우는 10 years잖아요. 조금 더 디테일한 릴라이빌리티 모델이니까 좀 그런 부분을 특히 부탁을 드렸고요. 또 하나 제가 나중에 패널 마지막 때 말씀을 드리려고 했는데 지금 우리가 이제 다양한 형태의 시장 개선을 이렇게 이제 가고 있는데 그 시장 개선 시나리오별로 데이터만 공개하면 우리가 이제 공개적으로 유즈 케이스를 만들어 가지고 디스커션을 할 수가 있거든요. 에너지시장 가격은 어떻게 되고 예를 들면 프라이머리, 엔실러리 서비스, 세컨더리, 털셔리 필요하다면 여기서 이야기하는 관성이라든지 마스터런 제너레이터에 대한 가격이 이렇게 놓으니까 신재생 사업자에 대한 역량을 어떻게 놓고 이런 부분에 대한 이제 디스커션이 가능한데 저도 시장자문위원회에 들어가 있기는 하지만 이 부분이 좀 우리는 너무 좀 폐쇄적으로 이렇게 가더라. 근데 이렇게 폐쇄적으로 갈 때는 또 하나의 장점은 있어요. 의사결정에 대한 속도가 이제 상당히 빨라진다. 시장 참여자들이 뭐 휴를 걸지 않는다는 이런 장점은 이렇게 있는데, 나중에 제가 이 전력시장이나 전력 쪽에 한 30년 이렇게 있어 보니까요, 항상 사람은 실수를 하게 돼 있어요. 보니까 실수를 했을 때 나중에 그 폭풍이 더 크더라. 그래서 지금 당장은 우리 시스템이 이제 그렇게 가진 않겠지만, 언젠가는 우리도 모든 정보를 점차적으로 오픈을 하고, 그 다음에 이런 디스커션 베이스로 이렇게 가서 의사결정을 해야 우리 전문가들도 좀 안전하고, 거래소도 그렇고 한전도 그렇고 정부도 그렇고 좀 안전해지는 시스템이 되지 않겠냐 해가지고 특별히 여기 발표할 때 그 부분에 대해서 많이 이렇게 요청을 드렸습니다. 네. 뭐 그 이후 다른 부분 Q&A 좀
혹시
해주시죠.
다른 이 친구의 프레젠테이션 내용에 대해서 말씀 안 해주시고 그 내용을 들으시다든가 꼭 이 내용이 아니다 하더라도 예를 들어서 발전사업자 입장에서 나는 뭐 이런 리퀘어먼트가 있었는데 뭐 이런 것들이 가능하냐라든가 어떤 종류의 그 질문도 좋습니다. 네, 역시 브레이크를 원하시는 것 같아요. 질문이 없으시면 설명까지 해주세요. 예. 그러면은 저기 사회자님 어디가 있고